Arcade Heroes.
Get ready!
Greetings, it's Adam with ArcadeHeroes.com, and I think it was Friday when I noticed something trending on X that was a little interesting. One thing that's annoying a lot of the times when it comes to covering the arcade industry is how often that people will misuse the word arcade. So sometimes when I see it being used, and especially if it's in terms of something that's home gaming, I'll just ignore it because home games use it all the time as a category or for, say, genre style when it's not actual arcade games like what we cover here. But it turned out that initially there was news about a new RoboCop game coming to MetaQuest 3, I think it was. And then that had been corrected to say that it was just coming to arcade. And that caused a bit of consternation there, a bit of sadness on the side of a lot of VR gamers that were really excited for it coming to that. Now, I don't know how it got misreported in the first place, but it's under development from this company called Coffee Moth Games. And it says here, in partnership with Amazon MGM, our team is currently developing RoboCop Streets of Anarchy VR, a VR arcade shooter coming in late 2025. Now, just from that language, it sounds like they're just using the term arcade as far as genre goes. But apparently in the corrected article that was, I think, posted on Upload VR, that it clarified that it was actually arcade, like the arcade that I'm standing in right now, or Godzilla Kaiju Wars VR and such. Now, of course, the question is, who would this be made for? There's a number of arcade companies out there that do deal with, making VR arcade machines. Raw Thrills does their Godzilla Kaiju Wars VR, which I mentioned. Hologate is a popular one. There's been Virtuix with their Omni Arena, VR with their games, and several others. That I think it was the corrected Upload VR article had stated that it was being developed for a company called Overdrive Games. Now, I have covered Overdrive before. I covered them at IAPA 2024, and this is one of their games that was at their booth. Now, as I admitted in the video there, I didn't recall hearing about this company prior to seeing them at the show, that they had been in business since 2021. They had games such as this chain gun one, and it was using AI to create new materials so that it would be different every single time. It uses a DPVR headset. Let's see if we jump around a little bit here. They also had a non-VR 3-screen motion seater based on NASCAR. Let's pause that and jump over to the other one. They also had a couple of licensed VR roller coaster rides, which I believe also had sensors to detect the movement of your hands. And one was based on the Gummy Bear YouTube phenomena, I guess is what you're supposed to call it, where they also had this annoying song playing non-stop and some poor soul that had to keep dancing to it the entire time for hours on end. I'm sure they've switched people out every now and then. But they also had licensed Roller Coaster Tycoon from Atari and created that into a VR motion ride. And so that's apparently the best knowledge. There hasn't been any official announcement yet that I've seen as to who it is that it's going, but that seems to be, I guess, the strong rumor at this point, that it's this company that's going to have a RoboCop VR game sometime later this year. Now, talking about this, usually when I post about VR, it doesn't get a lot of traction on my channel or on the blog, as I've been posting about VR-related things on the blog for many years, really since it hit the arcade scene, I'd say about 2014-ish. And we started seeing a lot of companies go to trade shows like IAPA or Amusement Expo, and they were brandishing different VR arcade products. That the number of those companies has drastically been whittled down. Now, this week, from when I'm recording this, right now it's the 16th of March, we're going to have Amusement Expo 2025 in Las Vegas. Now, in the past, they had been burgeoning their selection of exhibitors with a lot of different VR companies. But last year, I had noticed that it was diminished to about 12 companies where their primary focus was on VR as opposed to other products. So that wouldn't count something like, say, Raw Thrills. It would be a company like this one, Overdrive Games, where most of their products and most of their focus is on virtual reality as opposed to something else. And so last year was only 12. This year, it's only 2. I mean, it's, I guess, technically 6, but out of those 6, 4 of them aren't really showing any new VR products. They're showing something else it has nothing to do with VR. And so it's really whittling down a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that there's only 2 companies out there that focus on VR. It's just that even at a trade show where their product would make sense to be promoting, they're not doing it for whatever reason that it is. And so I think that does go hand in hand with this article that I saw earlier this week from How to Geek that said it might be time to admit the great VR experiment has failed, and he gets into how there have been a lot of developers jumping ship. I know that there's been a lot of problems with Meta and some of the constraints that they put on developers and doing certain things with kind of pulling the rug out from under developers are a few stories that I've heard of. I don't know if it's just Meta or if it's also some other ones too. Of course, Meta's been one of the more popular ones, but just sales haven't been great on VR headsets. And then there's other things too, which I've mentioned before, that are issues that, usually when you talk with somebody that's really into the VR industry, they're like, well, yeah, sure, it might have this problem, but that'll be solved soon. And I've been hearing that for over a decade now, mainly like, say, the cost needs to come down, or that motion sickness won't be a problem anymore. And now I used to get a really bad vertigo from using any sort of VR headset, and that was resolved mostly when I got LASIK. But I still occasionally have problems depending on the game, depending on the headset. There's a few different things that can still cause, if it's not vertigo, it can cause a migraine, where I'm not prone to getting migraines unless I use VR. Now, again, there have been some exceptions to that rule. King Kong VR by Raw Thrills actually was one of the few things that I've used that I didn't feel any ill effects whatsoever. But it's like, I know I'm not the only one. I know there's a segment of the population that just has a negative health reaction to using virtual reality. And so every time I'm hearing people touting like that VR was going to replace the flat screen display, it's like, that's just not possible when you have a percentage of the population, whether that's 5% or 10% or 15%, that can't use it because of that. That also creates this marketing nightmare where you have people who have negative reactions to it. Anytime they hear about VR, they'll talk negatively about it. And they might say that to somebody who wouldn't have those reactions, but it might keep them from wanting to get in on it just because they're like, well, so-and-so who I trust had a negative reaction, so I'm just not going to even bother with it. And I think that's what's been kind of playing out lately. Now, does that mean that VR is going to go away again? I don't really think so. This time around, there's been a lot of people that have latched onto it, and there are a lot of people that enjoy it. I'm sure there will be some that watch this, and you'll probably comment below how much you enjoy VR, and that's fine. And I'm sure there will be still VR arcade machines in this space, but I remember early on hearing multiple times from different people the claim that VR was the future, that it was going to replace everything in the arcade, all the flat displays, and that every machine was going to be VR, and that VR arcades would replace the traditional type arcades like the one I'm in right now. But I didn't feel that that was going to be accurate. I didn't see that for a number of reasons, including the one that I just talked about, the health reasons at the time. Also, wearables in public is always a harder thing to swallow. Now, I guess I should also state out on a pro for VR that with the right game, it can still earn money. It can still overcome those problems, such as Godzilla VR. I'm hearing that that's posting incredible numbers. When Virtual Rabbids first came out, that also posted incredible numbers. King Kong has also posted some pretty solid numbers too. But with all the VR products that are out there, most of them have bombed. Most of them have failed. Most of them have been put on fire sale. Down the hall from me is an FEC multi-million-dollar facility that caters to families. When they opened up in 2019, they had a Hologate for 4 players, and they got rid of it last year, and they replaced it with a couple of Fast and Furious Arcade Deluxe machines and a Godzilla. And so it just goes to show, and I've also heard some other facilities out there, some big multi-million-dollar facilities that have sold off their Hologates or other VR arenas for super cheap. Like those were somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000 to $100,000, to sometimes even higher, depending on where you went with those. And I saw some selling for $15,000. That they were just trying to get rid of them. And so, yeah, I just don't see VR taking over the world. And as I said in another video, I would rather see a lot more of the R&D stuff, especially if a lot of developers are abandoning VR at this point. I would rather see more stuff go towards non-wearable but immersive technology, such as immersive game rooms, mixed reality with projection mapping, and we're going to see that with Cyberpunk 2077 Turf Wars here in Vegas. And so I think a lot more fascinating and yet still immersive things can be done with mixed reality technology that doesn't require you to put anything on your face, which is one of the bigger barriers to entry. But the other nice thing about that for arcades is just the fact that it's going to be extremely difficult to reproduce mixed reality content at home because it generally requires some sort of unique surface for it to go on, or multiple surfaces and such. And so that could be an ace up the sleeve of arcades where you can create something, as I, again, talked about this in the other video, and it's just not something you can replicate with your phone or your home console. But anyways, perhaps RoboCop VR will be the game that really brings people out, will be the next Godzilla Kaiju Wars. What do you think about that? Or are you disappointed that it wasn't just going to be headed home? Let me know in the comments below, and we'll catch you